In this episode of Chop and Brew, we get pro tips on brewing Hazy IPA from Falling Knife Brewing Company, using their Hidden Temple Hazy IPA as a great example of the style. From ingredient selection and fermentation, all the way to why you might want to pre-acidify your wort, Falling Knife gets real nerdy on the do's and don'ts of making a most excellent Hazy IPA, and they've provided a homebrew scale recipe just for you. These pro interviews are made possible with support from Imperial Yeast, whose A38 Juice strain is the house yeast for Hazy IPAs at Falling Knife. Learn more about Juice at imperialyeast.com. And if you want more craft beer conversations and homebrew recipes, be sure to like this video, subscribe to Chop and Brew's YouTube if you aren't already, and consider supporting the show at patreon.com/chopandbrew. Now let's go hazy! What up? We are back at Falling Knife. We've moved into the game room. We're surrounded by beautiful pinball machines. I'm here with Tom, Robbie, head brewer and chief brewing officer, CBO of Falling Knife. They have a wonderful beer, Hidden Temple, flagship Hazy IPA. And a couple of years ago, they shared the recipe with me, and I never shared it with the rest of the world, which was the point. And it has since kind of like changed a little bit. So we want to just talk about this beer, Hidden Temple, what makes a Hazy IPA, I won't even say a good one, but just some tips and tricks that two pros have on this style, and anything that when people go to see the homebrew scale of this recipe, that they might want to take into consideration. So yeah, cheers. Thanks for having me right before the doors open.
Yes, sir. Thanks for
Are people literally going to like flood in here?
We've got a couple regulars who every time we open at 4 or 3, they'll come straight to the game.
Hope they're not here for the Avengers. They're going to be tapping my backside. All right.
Get comfy.
Hidden Temple. Tell me about it.
Yes, Hidden Temple is one of our 2 flagship Hazy IPAs. We're talking 7.3% alcohol by volume. And this one actually is now, it's a keg only year-round, excuse me, and then it's going to be in cans intermittently.
Oh,
so
cool.
Verbal is now kind of our 100% can keg flagship hazy, and this is in kegs.
Okay.
Kind of different from Verbal in the sense that we have a bit of a different hop lineup, kind of similar ABV, similar malt base, but kind of showcasing some different hops. And this is Idaho 7, Eldorado, and Mosaic Cryo. One thing that has changed in this beer is it used to be Azacca, Eldorado, and Mosaic Cryo. Now we've subbed the Azacca for Idaho 7.
Okay.
Partly for quality purposes. Yakima Chief hops is our predominant hop supplier now these days, and they are no longer carrying Azacca. So Idaho 7 was essentially the closest, best fit to replace that hop. So,
and part of the reason they switched from it too is just the way that it was being produced and grown, and like sort of changing from what Azacca was kind of supposed to be. So if you ever look at like a hop spider chart, it was showing more like herbal, earthy, grassy, woody.
Oh.
Which we're not. We're looking.
It was starting
for
to lean this way, whereas it started more citrusy,
tropical,
stone fruit, melon.
Okay.
So in this beer, we're definitely looking for more of a tropical vibe.
Yep.
So we want something that's going to represent like that citrus, tropical. Say.
Dank.
Yeah, a little bit of dank, but like specifically pineapple, probably some mango, some even kiwi, melon, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Which
it's got almost like this slight level of like tartness, which is kind of nice, which makes me think that kiwi, that like strawberry mixed with a lime, you know what I mean?
So we started looking at other spider charts for like Idaho 7 Strata and stuff, and like Idaho 7 is like perfect for this because it hits all those like very tropical citrus notes that we were looking for, and it knocks it out of the park.
Grist of 2-row, malted white wheat, flaked oats, flaked wheat. You can see the percentages in the recipe. So you're not bittering it per se. The only hot side is a Whirlpool edition.
Yeah, all of our Hazy IPAs is only a Whirlpool edition, and it is post boil. We don't do any pre-chilling of any wort down, so we have to make sure that we're calculating alpha acids, temperature specific utilization, But this one we've trended it down from about 22 IBUs to about 15, so we're trying to soften it up a little bit more. Make sure that kind of bitter bite is a little bit more subdued.
Okay.
So it gives it kind of that more perceived juicy kind of sweetness. Not overly sweet. We're still finishing, around 2.5 to 2.8 Plato, depending on fermentation. But kind of that balance between high protein malt with the wheat and the oats, lower IBU from the Whirlpool, and then locking in our finishing gravity with our mash temps, and then the juice yeast we use from Imperial. That's also another kind of pivotal factor and ingredient for us in creating these. And I'd probably say the most important would be our yeast being juice. It's what we use as our house ale yeast for hazies.
Because it works specifically well with, I assume these hops, you have it listed as dry hop, but is that actually kind of bio-tea?
So we harvest and use our yeast every week. So we keep it going. So we catch it on the tail end of fermentation, but we dry hop on day 7, so therefore we can harvest and use that yeast for a subsequent batch. So we may
You harvest it before you dry hop?
We harvest before dry hop.
Oh, so it is terminal when you dry hop.
So for the most part, yeah. So we'll say we brew it on a Wednesday. I know I'm going to harvest that following Wednesday, and we'll dry hop it thereafter that. So that, as far as scheduling wise, cost efficiency, we can use. We've been going up to 18 generations. We do cell counts, test for viability and overall yeast health and density. And that's another thing that creates solid beer for us as yeast health. I think that's probably about the most important aspect. And then also the Idaho 7 we use in the Whirlpool also is the highest survivables. So it actually, these aroma compounds and oils survive the boiling or heating process. So you're getting some biotransformation in the fact that you're having all these oils in the wort from the Whirlpool edition, and that also interacts with the yeast during fermentation to kind of create these unique flavors. So their biotransformation is not just from dry hopping, and actually there is some newer data coming from hot side specific hops and what hops contain more of those survivable compounds and which use less. And Idaho 7 being one of the top ones, it's also very cost effective, high alpha, so we can use less of it. So that's become more incorporated in how we add hops end of Whirlpool hot side and how that kind of can create more unique flavors through fermentation in those hop oils. YCH has a chart out there with all the different survivable compounds, what they are, and they've actually started breaking them down, which hop has what oil or what compound. A lot of these are sulfur compounds that kind of survive. So it's pretty unique stuff. I'm sure you can maybe plug and find that, or I can send it over to you. But yeah, they're coming out with some, cool new stuff and kind of explaining the why behind all of these probably aromas and flavors that we're tasting, but maybe don't necessarily know where they come from.
So you asked earlier kind of like what makes a hazy IPA.
Yeah.
Just sort of like, to us, the rules per se would be like, probably a little higher mash temperature generally, low to mid 150s probably.
To keep some
body
pillowiness to it.
Yeah, and then the softness also comes from your water manipulation. So you really need to go at least 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 chloride to sulfate ratio. So use like brewing water or like the brewer's friend calculator. Pretty easy to find. So do it. You could really use almost any malt for a base malt. We use 2-row in this one, but we've also been using a lot of Pilsner malts and whatnot too.
Some lighter color.
Just lighter color and some just kind of cool combinations. You can also use stuff like spelt and some other stuff, which is cool.
Malted oats.
Malted oats, but the combination of the wheat and oats is kind of the kind of, I don't say critical thing, but the thing that really
high protein.
High protein,
High protein polyphenols from hops create that kind of permanent haze.
Yeah.
The haze, right?
Yeah.
It's not. I learned recently. It has little to do with actually flocculation percentage of a strain. It's more about what does it do
Right.
with the hops that you're kind of putting into the equation.
Yep. Then, like Robbie said, your yeast is going to be critical. It really needs to be like, a lower flocking yeast, like a London 3, mid attenuation, like our Imperial we use, the juice. The thickness of the mash is maybe not as critical, but like 1 to 1.25 quarts per pound.
Yeah, we do like 1.2.
Something like that. And then, no finings is a big one, which you'd be surprised. People like wonder why it doesn't stay hazy. And it's like, well, did you use World Flock? Well, yeah, well, don't. You know what I mean? So,
A dry hop.
A big thing too is making sure you maintain your mash and your sparge pH with a beer like this, because you don't want to be mashing or sparging too high.
Okay.
Because
happens?
Well, it starts to get kind of muddled, and
Astringency.
you get some astringency. It just doesn't pull all those flavors, like separate them and make them all dance and do all the fun things. I mean, that's science right there, right? Just kidding. No, but I mean, so we typically will acidify. We use Minneapolis water, so it's pretty great for brewing, just as a base water. But we'll acidify the mash to hit like a 5.2 mash pH, and then he'll kind of like carry over some like dosing through the sparge process to sort of maintain that pH into the boil.
Because it'll try to shoot up.
Yep.
Yeah, and then another kind of tip I learned from actually Sean Carnahan over Insight is when you dry hop, you're actually adding vegetal matter, and that's going to increase the pH of your beer. And so the higher the pH, the less preservative you have in there, so it might actually oxidize faster. So if you pre-acidify before fermentation, you're going to kind of add a little bit of a buffer.
I see.
So
numbers may look weird going in, but it's going to.
Yep. So if
you got to
it's 4,
consider
9,
all the
or
things you're about
5,
to do to it.
if we were to test the pH post dry hop, we might go from 407, I think is a typical finishing pH for us. Once you dry hop, it's going to go up to like 4.6, 4.55, somewhere in there.
Okay.
So if you were to start higher, it's going to be up in the 4.8s. And he was saying that if you actually poured beer in pint glasses and let them sit on the bar top at varying different pHs, the higher the pH, the quicker it would start to kind of turn brown.
Really? Yeah.
We've
all seen the cursed brownish purple.
Yeah, so another kind of tip and trick that we learned from him and through his time over at Blackstack was starting to kind of pre-acidify a little bit during the brew, kind of get that buffer to compensate for the increase in pH for the dry hop.
And that kind of goes in the last thing that I was going to say is you watch, your oxygen pickup is the most critical process thing about this beer.
Especially with these beers.
Yep. So like when you're dry hopping and everything, make sure you're hopefully you're purging stuff with CO2. Anything like, especially with your hops, you're not storing them open. If you can vacuum seal open bags, the better. Stuff like that, because these beers, like probably anything over like 100 ppb of dissolved oxygen is going to start to turn brown on you pretty quick.
Because there's so much hop in solution.
There's
It's all the particulate matter, and
so close transfer if you can, but be as careful purging.
Purge your kegs.
Short of being closed the entire time,
just minimize whatever oxygen pickup you can, and those will last a lot longer. I think we test them every month, and we do use a program called Draft Lab, which is like our QA/QC. So we do like a true to target, and we open like a can, ideally every month. But we're getting into like the 150-day range now before we really start to see any sort of like change in haze or added color or really any noticeable oxidation. So that's huge.
Yeah.
We also have the tools that homebrewers.
I tried to brew one of these once, and it went that purpley brown on me.
Yeah.
And I was like, "There's 5 gallons gone." So now I'm just like, "Why would I do this when people like you?"
Right.
And to your point,
We're just gonna drink it
barrel
really
theory,
fast. Drink 5 gallons in 2 days.
I'll brew my weird ass smoke beers, the things that I can't go out and get. Whereas like why would I challenge myself?
Right.
But I want to encourage other people to challenge themselves.
That's the fun part.
Probably a big question people are going to have is like hopping rates as a hazy IPA, and don't be afraid to go for it. There is a point of no return though, where you start to lose your actual beer because there's so much hop matter in there. But like
4 to 5 pounds per barrel.
Yeah, so this would equate to about 15 ounces
We find using cryo as more kind of like layering. It's adding some depth and nuance to the beer. It may not necessarily be replacing poundage. I've heard anywhere from like it's replacing 2 to 1. So 1 ounce cryo is 2 ounce T90. I've heard it's 1.5. We kind of use it as layering, adding some depth, some flavor, aroma.
But it's like twice the cost and more or less like 1.5 to 2 times the potency.
Half the vegetal matter.
Costs more, but you get more.
Yep.
Right.
So like around the 4 to 5 pound per barrel, depending on how much beer we knock out. So that's 80 ounces per.
But you hear
31
about people
gallons.
going 6 to 8 pounds per barrel, and then I wonder why they only get 10 barrels of beer out of a 20 barrel batch, right?
Because there's this much silt at the bottom.
Right.
Well, right on, man. Is there any other thing somebody going after this specific recipe, Hidden Temple, need to know?
I mean, there's a sort of the timing on the yeast and the fermentation, like you said, like the 7-day thing.
Have a plan.
If you have a way to sort of measure your carbonation, where like something like this, you don't want to over-carbonate because it's going to then drink drier and like has less of that body and juiciness. So we're kind of shooting around that 2.6 volume, something like that.
What would a typical beer, say, cold IPA that you put on?
2.7.
Aim more for 3-ish?
2.62, 2.65 is kind of our house
Standard.
carb level.
Obviously like the darker beers and the thicker stuff. It's
2.5, 2.45, something like that.
1.5. Drinks like motor oil.
Right, literally. Yeah.
Yeah, do your starters, get your yeast going beforehand before you brew. We're not creating beer. Yeast is. We're just making food for the yeasty guys. So.
And we love like 007 and like USO 5 and USO 4, but those aren't going to work for this beer because it's going to flock too hard.
Flock out. So a lot of protein malt, a lot of oats, a lot of wheat, heavy in the dry hop. Those two will help kind of create that permanent haze. That's something that's going to fall out. Choosing the right yeast, like you said, juice, Brit 5. There are others, London Fog, the Helio Gazer, all those new, all the thiolized, creating those even
and
more.
that works too. We did the thiolized hazy and it worked,
No, I had it. That was good.
So
that was Cosmic? No, it was the other one. It was
that was London Tropics from Berkeley.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
That was a thiolized biotransformative. We did all the things in that one.
But if you're
Phantasm?
We did not do Phantasm.
Oh.
But if you're
making,
if you're making your kind of like first hazy IPA, I mean the safe hops are always going to be, for dry hopping, you're going to be Citra, Mosaic, Strata, Eldorado, Amarillo, Simcoe.
Yeah, why don't you see hazies with like Cascade Centennial?
You can.
Is it just not that profile that people are looking for when they order a hazy?
Those
IPA?
are going to have maybe a little like more piney sometimes,
Piney,
or
citrusy.
Yeah.
Versus citrusy tropical.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's like there's no necessarily.
Don't do that for the hell of it. Just make a hazy that's only cluster, Centennial,
just
Cascade. Yeah. Like Chinook, like the old school.
CTZ.
We've been actually liking Chinook from Indie Hops. They have Oregon-grown Chinook, so it's not as resinous and pine heavy. It's actually more citrusy, a little tropical. So it's a little bit more unique, from the terroir, from where it's grown. So that's also, Michigan grown stuff too. Also has some more, citrusy tropical notes. So you can spice it up a little bit with some C hops.
I'm gonna try it.
All
right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing the recipe. Thanks for sharing the beer. Thanks for sharing like your own kind of internal mathematics. As you revised it, it's cool to hear that like maybe even your suppliers. Supply changes how you now, need to kind of think about the Idaho 7 versus the Azacca. It's always, I don't think people realize enough of that out in the world, that like that's the reality when you get into like a large scale brewery.
Well, one thing that's been really fun too for us as of very recently is now we're able to hand select our Citra, Mosaic.
Let's go get them.
And Idaho 7 and our Strata. So that's been really fun because like we get to now sort of already pre-select before we select them, and then they bring, let's just call it 3 or whatever different varieties from different farms.
All ground up.
Yep. Don't know what to do.
all ground up, don't know what to do. Next thing you turn around and sniff hot
these are-
resin to you.
But it's so
No,
cool.
this is unreal.
It's so cool. Like,
Yeah, you're not getting what's left over. We actually get to be able to choose.
So once again, Hidden Temple Hazy IPA recipe is on the table, but it's also on the website, chopandbrew.com/recipes, and in the video description. If you'll have us, we'll come back. This is always like some of my favorite nerding out. Like whenever Chuck's like, "Where do you want to go?" I'm like, "Falling Knife." You know we're gonna learn a lot. We're gonna enjoy the beer that we drink. So, cheers! I'm gonna slam this glass
there you
of.
go. Cheers.
Cheers, guys.
Should we do lines?
It's a little more.
Burn.
Is this going in the outtakes?